What I'm going to be sharing is basically coming out of the experiences of our member sangams or sangatanas, as you would say here in the north. We are Dalit, small and marginal farmers, largely Dalit Bahujan and Adivasi, in different parts of Telangana and Andhra Pradesh. And I think the crisis in their own farming and food and livestock rearing, their own experience, really has been the starting point of our organizing, and the starting point of several of the times and all the times has been investigating why this crisis. And that investigation as a movement has been extremely critical for helping us to strategize of how we then re-strategize or look ahead. And the examples I'm going to be sharing here are really coming from two big experiences we've had in the recent past. One has been in the field of dairying, which really then led us to, in 2015, there was a huge collapse in dairy prices across the country. And many of the small and marginal farmers in the sangams were like, why are we suddenly receiving prices of milk which are like 16 rupees per litre? Even a bottle of water at that in 2015 was like 30 rupees a litre. And that investigation led us to the realization for the first time, it was not because India, till that time, right, India's first, the kind of collapses we've had in dairy prices were because there were imports of butterfat and SMP, skim milk powder. India being forced into reducing its entire import duties to zero. This was around 2000s. Soon after we signed into WTO, etc., etc. And of course, this dumping of butterfat and SMP really plunged the prices, and that was one of the reasons. But in our investigation, we actually discovered this is because India has actually also become more and more integrated into the global dairy system. We are also into exports. So I'm going to be flagging some of these things, and that's what really led us into this understanding, which I think I'm going to try and share with us today, of how there has been a big shift in India's own understanding of what is agriculture and for what are we producing food. And I think one of the big things has been what we discovered is no longer that you export your surplus, but it is really this redefinition of we become Atmanirbhar by export going to be finally driving our agriculture. So we stumbled upon this high-level export group on agriculture exports where they flagged, for instance, these 7 value chains, including beef, for instance, which otherwise, of course, is off the radar, right? And of course, so exports, whether it's medicinal plants, organic food, and all of this has to be done through really organizing the sector through value chain clusters, bringing in FPOs, linking them to agribusiness. And the underlying logic very clearly put out there is that India is now surplus in many of these commodities. And therefore, we need foreign markets where we're going to sell all this excess food that we have. And of course, their claims that they're going to be generating so many millions of additional kind of jobs. And of course, this is a framework which I think we're seeing increasingly, is that they really, and that was what they were trying to do through the farm laws, but they're doing it in any ways, regardless of whether the farm laws are there or not, is essentially they are seeing that this entire organizing this value chain, right? And so you have to bring in, there certain areas like in inputs, already they're really populated by huge big corporates. But there are these areas of production, aggregation, logistics, transportation, processing, where you see that you're still got these millions and millions of small farmers, millions and millions of small traders, wholesale dealers, commission agents, etc. And that now has to be organized, because without organizing that, you can't get the corporates to get the kind of profit which, of course, our country today is only interested in. And then, of course, when you look at the 15th Finance Commission, they have reasserted, if you look at how the pricing and the agriculture entire outlet, which has informed our budget as well, they are very clear that today it's going to be performance-based grants to states for agriculture reforms. And there are 4 indicators which they flag there. One is that states have to really bring in the kind of new land use reforms And very clearly here, this is not bringing in land lease reforms and regularizing them to benefit small and marginal farmers, nothing of the sort. They're very clear that this is for agriculture purpose, for setting up agro-industry, logistics for agriculture trade and supply chains. So if you can secure lease agreements, then you can make sure that, it's not that corporates have a protected reason and land where they're going to set this up, right? The second is sustainable and efficient water use in agriculture. So they talk about very clearly you have to replace this free subsidized electricity with market pricing. The third is very clearly export promotion, and the value chain clusters must be anchored by private sector value chain players to ensure market orientation through value-added products. So there is this, and they're very clear that the growth in agriculture exports is a target indicator for awarding this export performance of states. And finally, in contribution to this Atmanirbhar Bharat, it is of course becoming self-reliant in oil and wood, which has to be made in India. So in the 7 so-called lighthouse export produce, they have 7, including rice, milk, spices, chilies, etc., that we have to export, and then import substitution by wood and oil. Of course, liberalization is why we lost our sovereignty and our control over our food, or the oil that we eat. And today, of course, we're talking about its replacement. Now, what is its plans for replacements is utterly shocking. And of course, finally, that the release of this money will be this performance-based awards, based on an annual assessment of the progress made by the states on these indicators of growth, for instance, right? So one of the big things has been this palm oil plantations. And of course, this is nothing but facilitating corporate land grab, ecological destruction, water depletion, all in the name of growing soil, oil self-sufficiency. So if you read about this national big palm oil mission, and it is very, very scary. That's the kind of map that they have in mind. Already the states, and of course they talk about targeting 2 million so-called wastelands. We know these are not wastelands. These are lands which are grazed on by animals. These are lands on which farmers and communities collect their fuel wood, collect their medicinal plants, collect, so much is contributed to your sheer living. It is not wastelands. But this is their plan. They want to bring in at least, increase it from 3.5 lakh hectares to 10 lakh hectares. And so this is the kind of large kind of vision that they have in mind. They are also very clear that they want to declare palm oil a plantation crop, and it is to invite industry to invest. The land lease norm should be relaxed, allowing lease for up to 30 years. And this is argued will reduce import bills of oil from 15.3 billion to 10.9 by 2024-25. There are going to be tri-party agreements between private processors, state and farmers. Already the states of Telangana and Andhra Pradesh, the districts which have been identified are largely adivasi, are largely Schedule 5 regions where they want to really, infiltrate the area with this palm oil. And already Telangana, Kerala and AP are the top states with this, with the palm oil. And of course, digitalizing land records aligns with the state to facilitate all this corporate capture. And we, all of us, very well know that palm oil is a water guzzler. And of course, they're saying this is going to be to prevent intensive paddy cultivation and sugarcane cultivation. But of course, we know that palm oil itself is guzzling water, it's pesticide intensive, it is resulting in various places in Andhra Pradesh in reduction in water tables, in completely drying out the land. And if we have the knowledge of what's happening in Indonesia and Malaysia, you have to burn down those every year when you finally harvest. So there's all kinds of issues and problems here when we are kind of pushing in palm oil. Already Telangana has signed in MOUs with different kinds of processors, right? Coming to dairying, and it is really a livelihood, food, nutritional, health, climate and ecological nightmare of the Atmanirbhar dairying. They want to really enhance and increase exports. This is the kind of milk production increase. I mean, from 17 million tons, we're now on to 210 million tons. We're number 1 in the world in milk production. But of course, if you look at the per capita milk consumption, it's 427 grams per day. Even ICMR's own requirements is about, I think, 300 grams, but it's highly iniquitous consumption. We just heard from Deepa. I'm not going to go into that. So what is happening with all that milk? All that milk is not only feeding in a very elite class in urban centers, very value-added dairy products, but a huge increase and increasing vision of exports of dairy products. This is just this year's kind of example. The problem with India's exports of dairy, and if you look at this, this is the kind of trend since 2012, 2013. Export markets are highly volatile. And you can see this in the trend itself. You can see this in the global trends. And what I want to point out to you here is that when there was a dip in 2015, this is exactly when India's export price of S&P was much higher than the global prices. So no one was buying India's S&P. So there was a huge stockpiling up in India. And then they started to dump that, reconstitute that milk, dump it in different markets across the country, thereby it pushed down the dairy prices in India. And this is now, it's on a high right now, and there could very well be a slump in subsequent years. Now, the problem with all of this is that who gets pushed out? It's small and marginal farmers. And right now, the trend in India is the 1 to 2 dairy holding, cow holding farmers are really, really being pushed out. There's a move and a trend towards larger and larger farms. The consolidation is also happening at the processing end. Today, we have one major big cooperative agribusiness. It's more like a corporate agribusiness, and that's Amul, who's controlling, they're expanding their processing capacity across India. There are also proposals to merge cooperatives. I don't know how many of you are aware, there was a huge uproar in Karnataka recently because there was a proposal by the top ministers of our country that Nandini, which is Karnataka's main dairy cooperative, should be merged with Amul. There's this big plan and idea and vision that just as in New Zealand we have Fonterra, which is basically, they are the ones controlling the exports. In India, it should be Amul, which is controlling the exports. The other problem with this is, which is really hidden, is all this expansion and all this processing, we really are not looking at the implications on the climatic crisis, because nowhere are we accounting for the emissions down the value chain. As you keep intensifying, you keep moving away from normal local breed animals raised on grazing to more intensification of feeding. That means we're exporting water. That means we're replacing land for food with land for animal feed. So there's a huge number of problems over here, least of all the fact that at the end of the day, even the people in our own country are not even consuming that milk, right? Finally, I want to end with the experience of Adivasi areas, and this is a shocker of a story. The kind of digitalization we heard about, which we thought was in theory, actually in Andhra Pradesh, we are the state. It was formerly Telangana and Andhra Pradesh United. Now we are Telangana and Andhra Pradesh. That was a state soon after liberalization where we've seen all the experimentation of every single national capitalist market-based program that you see here today. Right from Arogyashri, which was the experimentation in Andhra, which today is the National Health Insurance Program, to the rural livelihood programs, which was in Andhra Pradesh experimented with SHG groups, self-help groups, the SERP kind of experience. Today, it's since 2014, when the AP state was formed, it has been about disrupting Adivasi lives in their territories. It's been the site of big tech, big data, capitalist market experimentation, very clearly facilitated by the state, along with the corporations, facilitating the corporations to take control. So it was kick-started again by yet another World Bank loan to AP in 2014 and subsequently several other loans with a very specific goal to include the vulnerable Adivasi farmers via FPOs to agriculture value chains, to link to agribusiness that will feed global supply chains, okay? And along with this entire system of using GIS, using data to make sure that every single Adivasi, without their knowledge, without their consent, all their data today, if you click on, you can see their data. And I'm just trying to show you some of this. So this is one FPG group in DB The farmers there don't even know they belong to that FPG group, but all their data is out there. Click on another click. This is the individual data, telephones, Aadhaar cards. I mean, what's going on over here? There's no question about privacy, right? And finally, what has been the base of all of this? In the name of women's empowerment. over 25 years of earlier liberalization phase, you organized women, and this is the write-up by the state itself. These women are not being organized for their empowerment or their liberation. It's being organized because they are a source or a foundation of this finance capital. They've got all their small little savings which have been organized and now can be a link both to agribusiness and also to be a where they're going to be fed with all these financial services, right? Of course, Andhra Pradesh government has signed, all these MOUs, etc., etc. Now, what we were talking about, I think several speakers mentioned this. Really, the most, I think, something which we were only able to unpack by delving into what is on hell is going on. If you talk to anybody in Andhra Pradesh today, they'll talk to you about how in every panchayat the state has set up something called the Sachivalayam, or a secretariat. Supposed to be a one-stop site where you can buy your financial services, you can sell your agriculture produce, and everything is there online. Now, the large picture over here, it has all been, you have over here a highly centralized system. I've just put out, you can go in and read for more clearly, but the experience of the people is everything is paid for, number one. Number two is that the Gram Panchayats, the Gram Sabha has been completely undermined. No Gram Sabha's consent of this kind of the use of data none of their consent has been taken. So there's a complete undermining of Adivasi self-rule, governance, PISA, etc., etc. Finally, I'm just going to run through this. It's also the way data and artificial intelligence markets are happening. This is giving you example. It's something which has been negotiated by a big organization which has been championed across globally and nationally for having done zero budget natural farming. It's the Raitu Sadhikara Samastha, which is pushing forward a kind of agroecological farming, backed by the most insidious kinds of experimentation of sustainability, again through all kinds using AI, data, etc., etc. So for instance, this is the way it's going to operate. They set up something called a landscape compact. I mean, the Adivasis don't even know that their territories have been converted into this kind of landscape. It's a market, right? So you can then, basically they are going to then sell this produce as sustainability, validated produce, right? Similar, so this is what they call a landscape approach. Just showing this for you, it's all up there for you to see. This is happening in Paderu, which is a Schedule 5 area. So what we are doing with this kind of, this is again, and who are their partners? It's there for you to see. So these aren't just some simple kind of, do-gooders. They're all together with the biggest multinational corporations who've created the destruction in the first place. Another kind of market called producers market. So they're connecting farmers and makers directly. And of course, their mother company is basically about pioneering, whether it is cryptocurrency or blockchain, etc., right? So these are the stories which are really quite, finally there's a GEF project, again, which is experimenting with something called blended finance. Blended finance, essentially, they're talking about how the subsidies which can be taken away from chemical fertilizers, because now you're doing agroecological farming, those subsidies, they're not going to be paying directly to farmers at all. But those subsidies, and very clearly has been mentioned, will be to service loans which you're taking from what is called blended capital, which is private capital investments, and the state standing guarantee to it. So as strategies for us, these has been very important, because only when you understand and unpack the reality can we organize against it. And that's where we are today. We're organizing against this, but we really needed to know how it is operating. Thank you.